Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it. Not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
And it's, it's not an overnight thing. Like, I'm unlearning everything I've been taught my entire life. I'm told my entire life, and I've thought my entire life that my tics are something that's wrong with me. But they're not. They are me.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network.
Please leave your message after the tone.
This is going to be kind of rambly and not focused, and I don't know how long it's going to be, but yeah. I don't really have many people in my life that can relate to my Tourette's. I don't have many, I don't have any. I don't know other people with Tourette's. Well, I know one person, but we don't really talk. Like, she's more of an acquaintance. And I wanted to be able to get my thoughts out in a way that was productive. And so I figured sending this voice memo was that. I'm currently in a mental health clinic. I get discharged in 2 days. And basically it's just group therapy all day long with, like, some of the groups are focused on, like, specifically talking. Some of them are focused on learning coping behaviors, and it's therapy. I talked about my Tourette's today, and I got kind of angry because someone in the group ended up trying to give me advice based off of, like, her niece, but it frustrated me because, like, the story she told tells me that her niece doesn't actually have Tourette's, because she's like, yeah, like, my niece went to this chiropractor and it helped her, and, like, now she doesn't have tics anymore. And it's telling me that either her niece never had Tourette's, she just had something very similar that was curable through chiropractic, or I don't know how to say I don't know what the proper term is, but, like, through a chiropractor, or her niece is going to eventually have tics again, because Tourette's is not curable. And, like, I actually get angry when people talk about it as if it is. Like, even if they just ask me, like, if there was a cure, what would you do? And it's like, I don't want to think about that because there isn't one. I don't want to think about that until there is a cure, because it's not relevant to me right now. Why should I have to tell you whether or not I would want to be cured when, like, that's not even an option for me? Like, why should I have to tell that to random people? And it angers me. And, like, I did answer their question when, like, someone asked me, like, would you want a cure today, when we were discussing it, because, like, I had mentioned, like, it makes me kind of uncomfortable that, like, you're talking about it this way. And I said, honestly, like, I'd want to keep from, like, hurting myself with my tics, but I don't think I would want it to be gone entirely because it's familiar. And they just didn't understand that. And it's like, it's part of who I am. Yeah, I got diagnosed at 19, but, like, it's always been part of my life. Like, I can remember having tics as a kid. Like, I didn't realize what they were at the time, and they just got called habits, which, like, I'm learning a lot of people had that, like, through this podcast. A lot of people had that experience of, like, if they were diagnosed at a later age, like, their family just saw them as, like, annoying habits. And that's how it was for me. But, like, I always knew something was off. I always felt like something was off. And it wasn't until I was 19, when my tics got worse, that I got diagnosed. And so, like, I've always been affected by my Tourette's. And it's a part of me. And being asked, like, would you want to get rid of a part of you is a big thing to ask. That's like asking, like, would you want to change your childhood? Or would you want to... The way I described it to my therapist today when I had my individual session instead of, like, the group session was I said, like, it's kind of like asking someone who was born blind what it would be like for them to see. Like, they don't know. They were born blind. Like, I don't know what it's like for me to not have Tourette's because I've always had Tourette's. And yeah, like, I got diagnosed late, but, like, I still had it. It still shaped who I was. And it frustrates me. I also wanted to talk about the fact that, like, I want to write a superhero for a comic book that has Tourette's. I already have, like, some ideas. Like, I know that their name is Benji and their hero name is Flameburst. I know that they have 2 powers. One, that they have super speed like the Flash, and they have control over fire, but they don't always have, like, actual control over it because of their Tourette's. And so, like, that's why they're called Flameburst, because, like, a burst of flame, but also, like, a burst of speed. And then I also know that, like, their main rogue, which is, like, typically what the, like, the less malicious villains tend to get called in comic books. They call them, like, their rogues gallery. Like, if you think of, like, Batman villains, like, all of those would be called the rogues gallery. But then, like, there's also, like, the more intense villains that, like, tend to not get along with the other rogues. Like, basically, like, if a rogue, like, if you could argue that they're genuinely a good person, they're a rogue. But if you can't argue that they're genuinely a good person, they're just, like, a straight up villain. Or at least that's how I define it. Like, I could be completely wrong, and not everyone just finds it this way. But that's just how I define it in terms of comic books. I'm going on a tangent. But I already know that, like, their main rogue also has Tourette's. I want a lot of their rogues to have, like, different disabilities because I feel like that's important. But I need to figure out how to write that in a way that is respectful of those disabilities that I don't have. And then also my problem is that every time I go to write, I kind of forget, like, situations that a superhero would actually, like, partake in. So, like, I'm not very good at, like, plot. And then also I, like, need to figure out, like, what their civilian jobs are, because I feel like that double identity is very important. Like, for example, my favorite thing about Superman is the fact that he's Clark Kent. Right now in DC Comics, they're doing this storyline where Superman revealed his identity to everyone through, like, a newspaper article that he wrote, and I just find it very stupid. Like, first of all, if I were Clark Kent's editor and he came to me with an article being like, yeah, I'm Superman and this is the story of my life, I would be like, no, you're not. Why are you writing this? Why are you expecting people to believe this? Like, if he kept insisting on it, I would even be like, I think you need to go to a therapist. Like, I would be concerned for his mental health. So, like, the fact that, like, they're doing this storyline where, like, it just got automatically published is just, it's stupid. It's just so stupid. Like, it wouldn't happen. And then there's also just the fact that I feel like that double identity is very important to his character. It's very important to every character. I went on a tangent again. Where do I want to go with this next to bring it back on the subject of Tourette's? But yeah, like, I feel like having a superhero with Tourette's is important to me personally because I just really love superheroes. And I think that, like, the idea of a superhero that goes through the same thing that I do is important not only for representation, but also just because, like, everyone goes through things, and it's different for everybody, and Tourette's is one of those things that people can go through. It's something that needs representation, because a lot of the representation that we see in the media is either just bad representation, like it's mocking, or it's just way too matter of fact, like it's not the most enjoyable. Like, it can be enjoyable, but it's not like fiction enjoyable. It's just very non-fiction, very matter of fact, very this is what it is. And that's good, but also we need to be able to see ourselves in things that are like intentionally fun, that are fiction, that are fantasy. Like, people don't have super speed in real life, but like it's really cool to think about it if we do. And like, everyone deserves to be able to picture themselves that way, not just able-bodied people. And I know that this character is very much a self-insert, because like, not only does he have Tourette's, but he's also trans, just like me. But also, like, sometimes the best stories start off as self-inserts, because who better to know how to write it than someone who's experienced it? And yeah, that's just one of my goals for life. Like, I don't want to be a professional writer, but I just love to write a story that eventually gets turned into a comic book that has that representation, because like, it's important to me and I want that. And then also, just this character has become like a comfort to me because I created it. It means a lot to me. Like, it's an aspect of me. I don't know why I went on that rant, but I wanted to. I wanted to talk about this story because, like, who knows, maybe talking about it will give me some inspiration. And yeah. I'm really enjoying this podcast. I can relate to a lot of things, like the ear popping tick. Like, I don't ever get to the point where I pop my ears, but like, I'm constantly trying. And this is probably no longer like something that you're like trying to find people, because like, it's been however long it's been since season 1. But like, in season 1, you just kept talking about it. And so like, I've been thinking about it. And like, I do that. Like, I attempt to pop my ears. I've never actually gotten to it just because I'm really bad at it. But like, I'm constantly trying by like opening my mouth and like stretching out my jaw and doing that. And then, I just can really relate with all the people who are saying that, like, yeah, like, they were just called habits growing up. That was really relatable to me. I relate with the people who are very open with their Tourette's, because, like, I've always been very open with it, because, like, I feel like I've had to fight to be recognized as legitimate. A term that my therapist uses is validated. I've had to fight to be validated in terms of like how I'm feeling and like my experiences, and because of that, like, it makes me more determined to validate myself through my actions and through how I interact with others in terms of educating people on Tourette's and being open about it. Like, it's something that's important to me, and it manifests through me being very open with it. So the people who are open with it, I can really relate to them. I can also relate to struggling with jobs. Someone talked about struggling with like getting jobs because of it, and like, I don't struggle to get the jobs, I struggle to keep them, because my tics act up from anxiety, because I just get anxious working at new jobs, and they act up, and I eventually end up quitting because I can't manage the job anymore. And I've even slipped into focal motor seizures twice in the past. It hasn't happened recently, but it has happened. And yeah, it's just, Tourette's is such a big part of my life, and like, the fact that I didn't know I have it, that I didn't know that I had it is very interesting. Not interesting. I lost track of what I was saying. The fact that I didn't know I have it is bizarre to me, because like it feels like such a fundamental thing, and like it took until I was 19 and I'm 24 now, so it's only been 5 years, which like 5 years can be a long time, but like for me it feels like nothing. It's just wild. Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot because like yesterday I hurt my wrist ticking, and now I'm in a wrist brace because like I kept cracking my wrist as one of my tics, and like I hurt my wrist from that. And so like ever since, like my Tourette's has been on my mind and I've been wanting to share it. So yeah. Sorry this is so long. Sorry this is so rambly and like all over the place. Sorry if I'm awkward. Sorry I keep saying sorry. But yeah, I just really wanted to send something because I want to connect with people that can relate. And this is one of the ways I can do it. And I just really appreciate the fact that you created this podcast, because it's helping people to connect. It's bringing people together, and I just think that's really cool. So thank you.
That was a voice message I received from a listener named Jackson, who I've been talking to. And yeah, it was long, but I think you heard Jackson say that the invite here for you to send me voice messages to play on the show was a good way to just get some thoughts out. And so I wanted to honor that. I actually love that, Jackson. That was some serious honesty. And while I would never pressure anyone to talk about things that you might think are too personal or too deep to disclose, I always appreciate it when I hear it, because I think it does a lot for other people to get into the mind frame, to share their stories too. But this one in particular, Jackson, I didn't think was rambly. I thought it was a great stream of consciousness, which I like listening to because I never know what to expect. I feel like I learn more when people just record their thoughts and let them go without a script. And I hear you on the need for fun portrayals of TS, not so serious all the time, not so sacred, not so clinical. And of course, as long as those portrayals come from within the community. I'm not completely disqualifying that someone outside the Tourette community can formulate an enjoyable and appreciable or even humorous character with TS. But there aren't many examples I know of. I know I talk about Motherless Brooklyn, and I thought it was a great movie. I thought it was really well shot, really beautiful. I liked the story. The TS was kind of a background thing for me almost. Even though the presentation of it, I did think was dignified and, again, not perfect at all. But I like the takeaways. Anyway, Jackson, I hope you do put something together. I'd love to see it if you do. Actually, a team of people did contact me a while back. Now that I'm talking about this, they're from Brazil, and they were working on a sitcom in which one of the characters would have Tourette. None of the people making the show had Tourette, and so I was worried, and I wanted to talk with them and hear them out. And they're definitely coming from the right place in the heart, and they seem to understand how challenging it can be to write something kind of sensitive from the outside. So what they wanted to do was essentially build a character with the direct input of the community, and I need to check back in on that, how that's going. But anyway, Jackson, I hear you and appreciate the entire direction of that message. And it's kind of a nice segue, too, into the vibe of the conversation you're going to hear on this episode between me and Gianna. She's our guest this week. Gianna got her master's degree in psychology recently and is working with disabled children, and we just have a really fun, loose time talking about that and about advocacy and using her frame of reference to welcome different kinds of people. We did this interview over Google Hangouts, and it's only the second time I've ever done it that way for this podcast, over a video connection. The other time being when I talked to Wendy Diaz, who, because it was a video connection, she gave me one of her tics. And so on this occasion with Gianna, I was extra ticky. It was worth it, and a really nice break from the world, considering we recorded this on election night in the States. It's just a nice timeout, nice head break. I love this episode, and I'll let our guest introduce herself right now.
So my name is Gianna. I live currently I grew up on Long Island. I just graduated from SUNY New Paltz in May, and I am currently working at a school with kids with disabilities. I got my master's in psychology, and I'm kind of just figuring out where I want to head next. Yeah.
Was it sort of, I guess, your own experience with the brain, so to speak, that led you to psychology, or what was your interest in that?
I think definitely the desire to understand myself more as well as other people. Very interested in the psyche and stuff like that. And definitely I'd say my own experience with Tourette syndrome as well as other comorbids that I have.
And you work with children with disabilities, or is it all ages, or is it mostly children, or?
Currently I'm placed in a middle school, so I'm working with kids with disabilities from age like 10 to 13, I guess. But the past 4 years, I've worked with children on the spectrum, mostly on the autism spectrum.
How'd you get connected with that?
So it's a funny story because I actually never I never had any desire to really work with kids. And my grandma worked for Western Suffolk BOCES when she was younger, and she had gotten my dad when he was my age, when he was in college. She had gotten him a job as a one-to-one aide in the school, and she kind of just suggested that I should apply for the summer school because they have a summer school program. And I was away at school, so it would be when I come home, I'd have, there's a 6-week program. So I applied, and within the first week of working with the individuals, I was like, this is what I want to do for sure.
Nice. Sometimes just having that relatability and that way to connect ends up being a little bit more powerful, and I think comforting to people who you end up working with. And maybe that's an unfair thing to say, I don't know, but do you find any truth in that?
Absolutely. I'm sure there's many neurotypical people who work with kids, with children and people with disabilities who do a wonderful job. But at least for me, I know what I've been through growing up, my whole life, just being different than everyone else. Being noticed, like something with Tourette's, like it's something that's very noticeable. I think it definitely has given me a sense of empathy and compassion for others that I wouldn't have if I didn't have this disorder.
We land where we land, and our experiences are our experiences, and we apply them in our own different ways, and we learn things along the way. But the more I talk to people on here, the more I find myself connecting with other people with different kinds of backgrounds. I'm not just talking about with disabilities, but certainly if it's something that's, you've kind of gone through life with some kind of misunderstanding or being in a position where advocacy is such a huge thing. And I think you said in your email that advocacy was kind of a direction that you saw yourself going in.
Yeah.
Is that something you kind of see weaving into psychology somehow, or what kind of profession do you see yourself going into?
This is where I'm at. I'm kind of at like that point where I'm trying to pick which there's a fork in the road. I'm trying to pick which way to go. Regardless, I know I do want to work with kids with disabilities. I'm trying to figure out my two options right now are school psychology and speech language pathology. So I'm kind of toying with those two at the moment.
Middle schoolers is who you're working with now? Currently,
yes.
So I think you said in your email to me that you were diagnosed roughly at that age, like the 6th, 7th grade kind of level.
Yeah.
What's your background with that? I mean, what was that around the time you started showing tics, or was it something a little bit more historic than that, and you finally got a diagnosis later on, or?
So I have had tics as long as I can remember being alive. I remember my first tic was probably I was maybe 5 years old. And I remember specifically, it was this one day in the summer, and it was after a day that I had spent the whole day in the pool with my sisters and my cousins. And I was sitting watching TV, and I kept blinking my eyes. And I thought, I had thought that it was maybe from being in the pool and like, opening my eyes underwater.
Yeah.
And that's probably my earliest memory of having a tic. That was the first time I ever noticed my eye tic. But my mom's told me stories how even when I was a baby, I would make this sound with my throat.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. But yeah, so I had tics all throughout elementary school. Never really knew what it was always extremely like embarrassed about it. Never, someone asked me why I was doing that, I would blatantly just ignore them because I was too ashamed and embarrassed, and also had no idea either what was going on. And then it's actually funny how I got diagnosed. So I basically diagnosed myself at first. Like, I've been diagnosed by professionals now, obviously, but I used to watch like on demand a lot, like HBO movies, Stars movies, stuff like that. And there was this one documentary on HBO, and it was called, I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of it. This was, back in like 2010 maybe, when I was in 7th grade. Which was also around the time when my tics started to exacerbate.
Sure.
And there was this documentary called I Have Tourette's, but Tourette's Doesn't Have Me. I think that's what it was called. Yeah,
I remember a document. I don't remember the title of it, but I do remember around that time period a documentary. I didn't see it.
It was with a bunch of kids too.
Yeah.
And I had put that on, not knowing what Tourette's was at all. I just put it on and started watching it. And I was like, these kids were just describing their tics, what it's like to have tics and Tourette's. And I was just like, holy shit.
Yeah.
That's what I have. And I went up to my mom a few days later, and I just started crying. And I was like, Mom, like, do I have Tourette's? And she was like, what are you talking about, Gianna? So that was the beginning of this whole journey. It's pretty.
Was she familiar with it in any way, or was it sort of like, I know what Tourette's is, it's not that, or?
I'm not sure. I don't think she was very familiar with it. I mean, if she was, it was probably just that it was, when you curse, curse, tic thing. But yeah, I mean, at first I don't think she really had any idea. She was kind of just laughing at me, like, what are you talking about? But then once she hopped right into it, like she was great with it. She did so much research and brought me to a bunch of doctors, neurologists, the whole 9 yards.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So watching something like that, it can be kind of a mix of emotions, probably too, where it's okay, this gives me a little bit more of a sense of identity. I understand what's going on with myself a little bit more. This is something to pursue. At the same time, it can be kind of anxious as well, because I'm sure the nature of that documentary was about being misunderstood and having to go through the world with a challenge. Was that bothering you in any way?
Honestly, it was. It's weird to like go back on this time, because I feel like I've forgotten a lot, but also remember like these very specific moments, such as this one.
Yeah.
It was scary. It was kind of scary that, this thing that I've been dealing with my whole life, that I've just kind of tried to push under the rug for my whole life. All of a sudden it had a name, and I wasn't the only one. And I guess, you would think that was comforting, but I don't really remember it being comforting at all. It almost made it more real to me.
I've been thinking, obviously since starting the podcast, I've tried to review my life a little bit more and what I was thinking at different times. And some of the questions I ask, I'm not sure if I will be able to answer them accurately, because I really don't remember, and I'm trying not to manufacture memories, but there are certain things that I feel like I am recalling that do feel accurate to me. Like when I was ticking for the first time, I do remember kind of going back and just thinking of, and I think one thing that helps is kind of framing a time and a place, not necessarily me trying to think directly at, like what were my earliest tics? What do I remember about ticking? I'll try to put myself back into like a certain classroom or think about a certain teacher. And then that kind of like recreates these
And you get to get the flood of the emotions, right?
Yeah. And it's all these things start popping back in. I'm like, oh, I remember this guy, this friend I had that I haven't thought about since I was, like that age, or whatever happened to that guy. And all these little things, it's like, it's almost like your memory just kind of like repairs itself in a way. And I know memory is fallible, and I know that it's not always something you can trust, but I am having more vivid memories of really early tics, and they're really kind of coming back for me the more that I think about them. Certain tics I did with my neck, where I would try to touch, like, I had this one tic where it was like the back of my hair, I tried to like touch the top of my spine with, and I would do it all day, and it looked like this weird kind of like almost like a dance move or something. But I remember that was one of the ones that people sort of pointed out about me and kind of messed with. The vocal tic that I have most prominently now and have for the past few years is one of the earliest tics I can remember. But I do remember the blinking tic and kind of how you were describing it. And I remember doing it again and again, and I would almost experiment with it, I think, where I would like clamp my eyes really tight, try to make different parts of my eyelid touch different parts of my, like the upper and the lower, kind of connecting them. And I remember it kind of feeling good in a way. And it was because I think I was kind of like scratching that itch, so to speak, even though I didn't know what was going on, but there was something about it that was like kind of nice in some weird way. And except for the outside, kind of view of what I was doing.
Yeah. It's interesting. And like how you put it, like scratching the itch, it's like, I feel like, all of my tics I do I don't know if you feel the same way, like it is scratching an itch. You're trying to get this feeling, but it's almost like the feeling is unreachable, which is why we keep ticking.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. You have to, I completely relate to that, because it's like, there's a way to do it right. And I put right in quotes, because
sometimes you have to do it like 5-10 times until you get it.
Yeah, I will go at it, and I will tick and I'll tick, and I'll try to get it exactly right. Like the vocal tick, I'll try to make it. There's a feeling in my throat. It's almost like I kind of visualize, like those like desktop kind of office ornaments, like the little balls that clack together and make that sound. I almost visualize that, like when I'm making my vocal tick, and it's like these things kind of have to hit together in the exact right way. And then I can move on. But then it's like my Tourette brain kind of comes back in, is like, maybe you didn't get it right. Let's do it again. And like, I'm not saying that's like precisely what I'm thinking or what happens, but it's kind of like that, because it's like my brain wants to go back to it and try it again. It's like, all right, it's like the director of the movie. It's like, come on, we got to do this one more time. Come on. And
you gotta get it. That's right. I feel, that I have my main vocal tic is that one. Like I kind of blow out of my nose, and I've, it started out like I first had this tic when I was in like 3rd or 4th grade, and it started out as a very just like light air blowing out of my nose, and now I just realized recently I kind of incorporate like my throat into it too. Like I have to kind of close it, and I think I use my tongue and stuff. And it's interesting because I didn't realize that until recently, how many parts of my body are involved in just creating this one feeling. And I'll sit there sometimes, and it interferes a lot. Well, I don't know if that's the right word. It interferes in when I'm talking and having conversations, because I have to pause what I'm saying. And it might just be a quick, like it might be quick, or I might be sitting there like almost like I'm like buffering.
Yeah. Oh boy. I relate to that. Oh God. I don't know if you've heard me talk about it in earlier seasons, but I used to be a newspaper reporter, and there was a story I would tell where I would be on the phone with somebody, and all of a sudden I would just, like, buffering is the perfect way to say it. I've never heard it described that way, but I totally relate to that. Like, I would just pause. I would be talking or asking a question, and I would just pause.
And they're like, hello?
Yeah. And I would hope that they would kind of analyze and be like, oh, we just got cut off, except there's still background noise, so they know we're still connected. So it's like, what is this guy doing? And it was a horribly self-conscious thing for me to have. And there were literally times, and I remember specific times where I just ended up hanging up, and then I called back, and and just to try to like reinitiate it, collect myself. But that was one of my worst tics, just because outwardly it's almost weirder, so to speak, than vocal tics and movements, because it's just me freezing there. Yeah. And it creates the sense of suspense for whoever is observing it. And they're like, wait a minute, what's happening?
And sometimes they'll try to like finish your sentences and stuff. I mean, that happens to me at least sometimes. But like, people in my life, like my friends and my family, they know what's happening when I pause in the middle of my sentence. And this tic, like my vocal tic, is the tic that brings the most attention to me, especially since the pandemic, because I'm sniffling and it's noises. Everyone's like, are you sick? I feel like tic has made me, has given me the challenge to come out with having Tourette's way more than I ever have had to. Yeah. It's annoying at times, but it's also like, especially working in a school with these kids, it's almost like it's nice, because when I was younger and people would ask me what the hell I was doing, I would ignore it. I'd get so triggered and embarrassed and just want to hide and disappear. And now I find myself just being like, oh, that's just a tic. I have Tourette's. And I don't even get like a rush of anxiety or shame like I used to. It's just like, oh, it's just this. And it's almost like I'm just disclosing this little part of me that might be a little weird and different. And, I feel like the reactions I get are mostly just like, oh, Yeah.
It's such a scary thing to go there, because, you don't know what the reaction is going to be. Yeah. And not everybody has a good experience. And you hear
there's a sense of awkwardness and uncomfortableness. Yeah. In it, for everyone, not just me. Because people a lot of times will get embarrassed for pointing it out. And I'm like, it's okay. Honestly, I'd rather the people around me know. I'd rather people know than just sit and come up with conclusions. And, that's at least how I feel now.
Have you had many experiences in being misunderstood or being kind of put where you shouldn't have been, or, mislabeled or?
I mean, it's actually funny because recently one of my friends who like, I haven't, he's in like my friend group, but I haven't spent that much time with him, and I've never spent one-on-one time with him. Yeah. And I had been talking about my Tourette's to all my friends one night when we were all together. He was like, "What? You have Tourette's? I thought you were just weird." And I just thought that was really funny and kind of cute. Like, I don't, like, I feel like back then I would probably take that as an insult, but now, like, it's just one of my quirks, like, makes me who I am. But when I was younger, like in middle school, when my tic started to exacerbate, my main tic was a full body, like, jolt, and if I was walking, I'd have to pause and do it. And, I got bullied real bad in middle school. Kids mocking me, this went on for like 6 months until I finally broke down and told my mom. And then clearly, like, we had to go to the administration and, figure out how to fix this. Cause it was unbearable. It got to the point where it was unbearable. And, like, as I got older, I've had people say some things, but as I get older, I take less and less offense, because people really, they just don't know. Yeah. And I feel like the amount of people, I feel like, especially since I've been to college, like meeting so many people, the amount of people that I was able to enlighten about what Tourette's actually is and how it actually affects like a lot of people, because I do have technically like a mild case. I'm happy with that. I'm happy to be able to bring awareness to this disorder, because it's something that we don't get much representation anywhere. Right.
Did you have challenges with teachers and adults? Because you're mentioning kids, and kids will be that way. It's almost like a fact of life. If you're 12 and 13, understanding is not going to be built into everybody. But But adults who, should, and I say should in quotes, know better, or at least have more patience with different kinds of people. Did you have misunderstandings with teachers, or did they seem to know the score? Or
not that I can recall. I don't think so. In middle school, when all of the bullying was happening, that was when I think me and my mom sent an email to all of my teachers and informed them. But since then, I've only really told my teachers and my professors on like a need to know basis.
Sure.
What kind of almost wish I told more. Because there were times where I definitely could have had like accommodations, like, because I would take, sitting still is very hard for me, obviously. Sitting in classrooms it's difficult. I tick a lot. I mean, it's probably more distracting to me than anyone else, but it would have been nice to be able to just like, get up and leave for a little, like.
Well, no, I think it's a nice outlook that you have, that, it takes kind of going there and being there to know that not everybody speaks the same language, not everybody has the same frame of reference, and there are blind spots that people have. And sometimes even if you acknowledge that you do have blind spots, and it's been one of my favorite things, just to say like, I don't know, or if I don't know the answer to something, I'm not going to be so sure about myself. If someone tells me a story that doesn't seem like something I immediately identify with, I'm not going to doubt it. I'm going to, I want to learn more about it, or, take that as like another validation that we all come from different places and we're not immediately going to get it. And the trick is, to identify that in yourself. Of, this guy comes from a different experience than me, and I don't get it, but I can understand the concept of coming from somewhere that's different, and I don't know it. And that has kind of been my answer to it, of being okay with other people not knowing everything about me. I can't expect everybody in the world to be a Tourette expert, but it is a nice thing to be able to realize that there are lots of things you don't know about other people. And if you make room for them to talk and listen and take the pressure off, and don't judge people for something that is, that on the face of it, you just don't get. So it's a really nice outlook that you have, that people are not going to just be there on board with you immediately.
Yeah. That reminded me of the quote, "The wisest man realizes that he knows nothing at all." Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. What's the word? Like epistemology, where you just kind of, it's the sort of study of knowing, of how we know what we know. It's like what we know is not more important than how we know it. And, we can have these really cemented viewpoints that are not negotiable. They're not malleable. We're not going to change them. And that just leads to so many clashes, and it's what we're seeing, like as you and I are talking, it's election night 2020. And this is a really nice break, even though I'm mentioning it. Talking to you about this is a really nice break from that, because it's about understanding, and it's about, understanding our blind spots and being able to
hearing each other out and being able to share our experiences. I think it's so important. That's why, I told you, I've just recently started doing some more advocacy for Tourette's. Just even like, because, for a long time on like my social media and stuff, I would want to post things, but I'd like post something about having Tourette's and the Tourette's experience and then delete it. And I don't even really know why. I guess I just wasn't ready to share with the world on a platform, especially where it's not like we're in person, where it's inevitable for you to notice me ticking. It's, I'm showing the world what I want them to see. Right. And I'm to a point where now I want the world to see my tics and to see my life with Tourette's. I don't want to be ashamed. I don't want to hide it, because it is a very important part of my identity.
Yeah. That's the realization that you can't control the narrative, but you can give people more material to work with to fill in the blanks of what they don't understand. And That's why analogies were so important, to the Tourette community of, how do you make a tic relatable to other people? Like, it's telling somebody to, hold your eyes open and just try not to blink. You're going to blink.
That was the one I always used my entire life. That's the exact analogy I always use, like having a staring contest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's, to me, that's one of the most, I think, direct. Some people say it's like scratching an itch. I mean, you can technically hold off and it'll go away. With tics, it's not, and I guess sometimes maybe you can suppress and then it changes. But some people say, it's like the yawning thing, and it's still not quite as direct to me. Because with blinking, like, you got to do it. It's going to drive you nuts. You're going to have to do it, and that's the one I've been using mostly.
Like, die if you don't.
Yeah.
Such a strong urge.
And it's, the longer you wait, the worse it can feel. And, or the more intense your reaction is going to be. It's almost like holding off a tic is like, once you finally get to it, it's like your brain's overcompensating. You're really trying to repair that time period that you were avoiding not ticking. Mm-hmm. It's really bizarre.
The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit tourette.org, TOURETTE.org.
With advocacy, is it mainly just Tourette advocacy that you want to do, or is it disabilities in general, or?
I would definitely say disabilities in general. I'm definitely a big advocate for people living with disabilities. I'm very, throughout like my college experience, I've found that I'm very interested in the diversity of life.
Yeah.
As as humans, like there's so many different experiences that people are living, and especially with a lot of disabilities, we don't get the representation, even if it's a disability that only like one in however many people have. I think it's still so interesting to see how people adapt and to see how people thrive, and it's very interesting to me. I mean, Tourette's is definitely like my disability that I advocate for, as well as my comorbids. Mm-hmm. But I find myself sharing so many like videos and articles about people all over the spectrum of disability, and just not only neurodiverse people, but also physical disabilities as well.
Yeah. Well, it's just like you saw that special that kind of gave you the revelation of like, oh, this is what I have. It's the more you do it and the more you advocate, the more you're going to give that opportunity to other people who need to see themselves in the representation on TV, or at least like, oh, this person's describing something exactly how I would describe it, or has the same experience. They're doing something that, wow, okay, this is all making sense to me now. And you can answer questions about yourself. And I really like the diversity angle that you're taking with it. Because I know some people think, it's diversity for the sake of diversity. What I really like is the narrative. And I've talked about it before. It seems like back in the day when I was young, I remember the sort of narrative of equality was, we're all the same. We're no different. We're all just, and I understand the spirit of that, but I really prefer the narrative of like, no, we're all really different. And that's something we should really learn about each other and really appreciate. And, you're different. That's going to give you experiences and perspectives that can really help repair my blind spots.
Exactly.
And really inform maybe, or reframe how I should think about certain things that even have nothing to do with you. It could be something completely different in life, but it's just a different kind of code that you can crack by accepting the fact that we are all different. And let's look out for these differences and protect them and cherish them. And,
Yeah. It's truly amazing. It's fascinating. and I feel like social media, I mean, maybe it's just my algorithm on my social media because I, interact with a lot of this type of stuff. But I find that more and more people are accepting and embracing and celebrating their disabilities, but not even just that, because people are also sharing the difficult times as well, and I think it's a very beautiful thing to look at the difference and diversity in the human experience, because it's, there's a lot, and like you said, like we have so many blind spots.
Yeah, it's like
also like I love reading memoirs, and through reading memoirs, it's almost like you're living a million different lives,
Yeah, it's neat how you can take someone who, is from a totally different time period, but you can find these parallels within yourself, and it's not for necessarily looking for them. They just pop out at you because you're getting to appreciate someone in their own words. If it's an autobiography and it was written by the person who the story's about, then they'll have these experiences that totally change their life. I mean, that's always the pivotal part of any sort of, documentary about someone. This is the moment that got me to realize, or this is the moment where I invented this thing, or changed my outlook about something. It's always something kind of small / huge. It's just something that may have passed you by a million times, but when you finally took a moment to kind of sit down with it and notice it, it's, that's when it really starts speaking to you. And, Tourette statistically is, I don't know if statistically is the right word, but we know it's an underdiagnosed disorder, and there could be different reasons for that. One could be lack of access to care, different parts of the world, the way they kind of regard something like that, whether it's a weakness or embarrassing, or does it bring shame on you to have a diagnosis like this, or it's just you haven't heard the right story yet. Like you've been living with this thing within yourself, but you haven't seen the right video yet. Or it's almost like it just kind of smacks you. And I've heard so many stories. I've talked with, I think, maybe 3 or 4 different people on this podcast who've been like sitting on the couch watching something with their significant other, and then some Tourette thing comes on TV, and they look at each other like, oh my God, like that's it, and then they go and get the diagnosis. Diagnosis is not the same thing as having TS. You could live a whole life and never get diagnosed, but still legitimately have it. Yeah. And it's just kind of finding your way into it, or letting it find you.
Exactly.
Did you ever struggle with whether, I mean, I know people were kind of like noticing tics with you and kind of mocking them, or did you ever struggle with talking about it with other people when you were younger, or is this like, oh God, don't even bring it up?
Oh yeah. I mean, as I was saying before, like, kids all the time would be like, what are you doing? Why do you keep doing that? And I just, I would literally just walk away, turn my back, ignore, pretend like I didn't hear them.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
And then, in like high school, I remember these girls were bullying me over like Twitter, I think it was. And I basically was just like, I don't know how you could think that's funny when I have an actual disorder, so I would kind of only say it if somebody like pointed it out or is being rude. But it's funny because I had mentioned in my email that I'm queer. I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And for a lot of years, up until like the past 2 years, I'd say, let's see, I came out when I was 16, I believe. And for years, coming out as queer was so much easier for me than coming out as having Tourette's. I found a lot of parallels between those two things.
Absolutely. And I've had the same conversation with other gay Touretters who for them, it was community. It was the size of community and the resources that were available to them, and the representation on and TV shows, movies, books, but not really basically seeing Tourette as more of the pariah thing, in the eyes of society at large, is finding the way to, I think, communicate it to people where they're going to understand. And if say, we're talking back in the 1950s, you had far fewer people who were openly gay.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't necessarily have access to the maybe even a way to find community sometimes. There are always scenes, like there are always places to go and you could find your community.
I never really even realized that, but yeah, it's totally the sense of community. Cause I didn't meet anyone who had Tourette's until I think I was 17. But I had, connected with a lot of people who were gay, whether it was, friends or even over the internet, it was much more like publicized and recognized thing, I guess.
Well, it just speaks to the power of what you want to do with advocacy for disabled people, and the more advocacy you do, the more the message gets out there, the more you fuel the message that, you're definitely not alone. And there are people who get exactly where you're coming from. They're cool. You got community. Like there's nothing to worry about. These people who don't get it, they just don't get it. It's over time, hopefully they're going to change and maybe they'll grow, or there's somebody in their family who, you hear that story a lot too, where they're someone who, maybe their sort of overall thematic values might be not aligned with the gay community, with the LGBTQ community, but there will be a family member, a daughter, or someone who comes out as gay, and that kind of changes their narrative and changes their tune and how they regard this whole thing, and it's just that closeness, it's just that connection, and I feel like everybody needs to kind of make room. And we've even talked about this, like within the Tourette community, how sometimes people like to distance themselves from from coprolalia, and it's like, I have Tourette, but I don't have the swearing kind. Don't worry about it. And that's cruel. Like, why do we need to marginalize people who we really, really relate to?
Exactly.
It just be open to the fact that if you have TS, you might develop coprolalia, and you might.
Gonna say that, and like, how could you distance yourself from this part? It is a part, I mean, of Tourette's. It's a tic,
right?
I mean, it's slightly different, just because it's a vocal tic, but it's it's more obscene, but it's also like they can't help it, just like, what it's like not to be able to control your tics. How could you,
Yeah. And you even hear it from people. I've heard from people who are diagnosed with a different kind of tic disorder that isn't Tourette. Like maybe it's just motor tic disorder, or
originally got diagnosed with first.
Really?
Diagnosed with Tourette's, yeah.
Yeah, see, that's interesting, because some of the people I hear from who've been diagnosed with that don't feel like they have the same level of community because it's not Tourette specifically. Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, that doesn't count. It's the same life experience.
That's true. And that actually, you just reminded me of something that I haven't thought of in years. I remember when I first got diagnosed, I was following this girl who had Tourette's on Instagram, I think it was, and I had messaged her and been like, oh, like, I have Tourette's, because when I first got diagnosed with motor tic disorder, I would just call it Tourette's, because I thought it was kind of interchangeable, or at least more like, people were more receptive to Tourette's. And she was like, you shouldn't be saying that you have Tourette's if you weren't diagnosed by a professional. And it was discouraging. I was like, well, I mean, it's sort of the same thing, except I might be lacking one vocal tic,
Mm-hmm.
It's like really the difference. But
yeah, with this podcast, and I'll say it to remind anybody, because I haven't said it in a while, but like, I'll never take diagnosis as a requirement to be on Tourette's podcast, because if you have it, you have it. And again, it could be a zillion different reasons why you haven't been diagnosed yet. Could be, a financial thing. It could be lack of access. Could be, it's really a shame when people have to kind of, recategorize because it's like some kind of club or something. And club can be interchangeable with community, but if you're using it in some sort of exclusive way, that's kind of the
Exactly.
wrong idea.
Yeah. It's like defeating the whole purpose.
Anyway, I'm really stoked at what you're doing and the direction that you're taking,
Yeah.
because you can relate it well, and the more you do it, the more things you're going to find to relate to other people.
Absolutely.
What haven't I asked about yet? I feel like we've been kind of jamming on the sort of diversity and kind of what that means in practice, and I want to know more about you as well, and direction you want to take with it, or challenges you've had with it. Have there been any like workplace challenges with Tourette or ticking, or?
So within the past few months, I have been sort of struggling because I started working at a new school, and I was meeting a lot of new people, and my nose tick had been acting up. You know how they wax and wane. The first few weeks, it was really acting up, and I was definitely struggling a lot because, like if I was in a small work setting with like a few people contained in like a room, maybe I would feel way more comfortable. Like, I like disclosing and being like, okay, this is what's going on. But I was kind of working the position I was working. I was kind of, interacting with a lot of different people every day.
Mm-hmm.
And my tick was acting up, and I was having a really hard time with knowing that they were perceiving it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel there was really no way at that time for me to come out with it.
Right.
And I found myself focusing on it a lot, having the feelings of shame and worrying about what everyone was thinking, especially during the pandemic. But since that, I've been working on that kind of stuff with my therapist right now, and she's helped me a lot with kind of putting those thoughts and worries at rest, and not letting them kind of overcome me.
What's the trick to that?
So basically, there's like a bunch of tools, but the main idea of one of the tools that she has taught me is I'm trying to like word this correctly. It's kind of, I'm on a journey learning to accept and love myself so that I don't need others to. Like
Yeah.
Just a sense of like what does it really mean, and how does it really affect me the way others perceive my tics? And it's not an overnight thing. Like I'm unlearning everything I've been taught my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I've been taught my entire life and told my entire life, and I've thought my entire life that my tics are something that's wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not. They are me,
I love that, because it's the validation that you can sort of do work in your own garage, so to speak, and versus trying to control the whole world around you. And
Mm-hmm.
It's going to do what it's going to do, but it's amazing how much people read off of you with the way you carry yourself and the way you appraise yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're living your life and you're doing your thing. And sometimes you don't even worry about that either. It's value yourself the way you want to value yourself. And I could really take my own advice, because I'm definitely still learning this, and I'm still, struggling with it. Really self-conscious.
Yeah.
Way less so than I used to be.
It's a long process though. It's a very long process.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I've come, I still, have moments of resentment towards my disorder, and, just, it's really hard from a spiritual perspective. Like I always think it's very hard being in a body, just having a body, let alone having a body that you don't really have control of.
Yeah.
It's a very unique experience, and it's a very difficult one at that. There's a lot of pain. And yeah, but I mean, this is the card I've been dealt, so to speak. So
it's like you're driving a car that steers itself.
You know, I read an article once because I was researching like a spiritual perspective on Tourette's, because you see some spiritual perspectives on like certain mental illnesses and stuff like that. And I had found this one article, and that was exactly the analogy that the person used. It's like, you know, driving a car with all these, you know, little jerks and stuff, and it's like your foot isn't fully connected to the pedal.
Yeah. That's interesting. It makes me think of, I think this was debunked to some degree, but do you remember the story? This is maybe like 10 years ago, about the Toyota Prius and how the gas pedal would go like, I don't know, it would go down by itself or something like that.
Oh, I don't remember. It's 10 years ago. I was 12. So I was reading about cars. I just realized 10 years ago, that was when I was diagnosed. I didn't even realize that.
10 years ago?
Yeah, because I'm 22 now, and 10 years ago, it's been 10 years since I've been diagnosed with Tourette's.
This is your decennial Tourette anniversary. This is our version of AI, I think. You know, you can have a brain that has all these processes that we don't control. We're way ahead of the game on the AI thing.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so much fun talking. Like, I feel like this has been more of like I was about to say hangout, because we're literally talking like Google Hangouts right now, but but no, this really has been just kind of like a hangout kind of conversation, which I like. You know, we haven't really, I think it's been a little bit more loose and freewheeling than even typical, which is nice because, you know, I don't have all your same life experiences, but we definitely speak the same language on a number of things. And, you know, I'm a different age as you. I'm 40, but I don't think I'm ever going to really change that code. I can always just kind of supplement it by talking to people like you and learning about the way you look at things, and it helps me.
Work, I have to say, I listen to your podcast all the time on my way to work. I just randomly one day, like, I was like, I wonder if I never listen to podcasts ever. I was just like, let me see if there's like a podcast like specifically for, you know, Tourette syndrome. And I found yours on Spotify, and I mean, it's so nice, like, because like I said, you don't meet a lot of people with Tourette syndrome,
right?
So it's really an amazing thing to be able to listen to all of these different experiences with the disorder, and it's comforting. You know, I laugh. I get, you know, people will say things and I'm like, wow, that's something I could have never put into words, but I know exactly what they're talking about. So thank you for what you do. Seriously.
No, thank you. Cause what you just said is like, I'm a big beneficiary of that. Like, I have a completely different bank of terminology and analogies and perspectives. And it's completely because I've been listening to other people, people of different ages, people from different countries, and there's always this sort of common thread between all of us, but your life experience and the way it deals with that common thread is really interesting. And it's neat to be able to talk really fluently with someone else who I've never talked with before. But, you know, and maybe it's just because the Tourette stuff is out of the way. I don't have to explain myself to you. You get it.
It's like a level of comfort.
Yeah. This has been so nice. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Any final words you want to throw down?
So, one of my friends, she has a small business and she makes scrunchies, and she made a scrunchie last month, named Gianna, and she donates the proceeds to the Tourette Association.
That's awesome.
So if I could give her a little shout out, that would be cool. Cause her doing that was kind of what, inspired me to reach out to you. So.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. Where do people find it? Or this is online, I assume?
It's Shop Tony shoptoni.co. So shoptoni.co. And you can find it on Instagram, and they have a website. Yeah, it's a small little business from Long Island. So everyone should check it out.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes with the episode.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. I mean, this has really been fun. I'm glad you reached out, and I'm glad you're going into the line of work you're going into. If you have a natural connection to it, it's going to be a lot, I think, more effective. So, yeah.
It's definitely what I'm meant to do, for sure.
Thanks for listening. Thank you to Gianna for being a fun person to hang out with. If you have any thoughts about any part of our conversation, anything to respond to, add to, anything, let me know. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. You can do so in writing, and I'll read it on the show, or do what Jackson did and send in a voice memo. Again, tourettespodcast@gmail.com. At Tourette'sPod on Twitter, Tourette's Podcast on Instagram, patreon.com/Tourette'sPodcast if you'd like to give a small amount of individual support to the show. And if you do, let me know if I can name you in my thank yous at the end of the episode and give you an executive producer credit, like I will give now to Carolyn, Jerry, Rebecca, Esther, Sarah, Alex, Ramona, and more. You people are amazing, and your support truly actually helps the show. And obviously, I can't neglect to give gigantic thanks to the primary sponsor, the Tourette Association of America, because they care about the kind of conversations we're having here and the many ripple effects they can have. Thank you, TAA. You're amazing. As is Sophia, our discussion group admin, who keeps it all together. That's the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook, with hundreds and hundreds of members. Join up and say hello. And last but certainly not least, thanks to Geeks Rising, the network that brings this podcast to a greater listening audience. Data. My dog clacking in the background as I'm trying to read the credits. Anyway, geeksrising.com, and if you're still in the Halloween spirit, you can watch a rerun of our Halloween webcast that we did. It's on YouTube with me, Bandrew, Heather, and Zach. And the topic of the night was our top 3 favorite horror movies. By the way, I'd love to hear yours. Enjoy your weekend. I know it's been kind of a stressful week. Hope everything's good for the week ahead, and I will talk to you next time. This is Ben.